Welcome, my friends, to the third day of the Airthings Masters. It's the final day of the preliminary stage, which means today 8 players make it to the knockout and 4 players get sent home. I'm going to take you through all 3 rounds. We had a lot more decisive results today, a lot more exciting action, timestamps on the video player per round. I've got nothing else really to say. I'm going to try to keep you updated as the games go on. It's the 9th round, first game of the third day. Hikaru versus David Anton, Spanish Grandmaster and Spanish number 2. And this one was a Catalan, one of the best opening systems that you can play as you look to make moves up the rating ladder. Exceptionally strong opening where you give away a pawn on c4 for long-range power. And Hikaru in this game prepared for a game that David Anton played 2 weeks ago. Like, that's the crazy thing about online chess, is that if you play a game, it's going to be sniped. It's not like always, you know, some classical chess from years ago. Hikaru prepared up until this moment when David Anton's opponent in the other game played bishop takes b4. Hikaru, though, wins the pawn back, and really the game gets kind of the most interesting right here. So notice that a natural developing move here for Hikaru is castles. He chooses not to do that and instead chooses to put the knight on e5, attacking the pawn on c6 with the bishop and the knight, with some serious annoying pressure here. Rook c8 and now knight d6. Now here, David Anton did not just play the move rook c7 because he thought that after knight c6 he's in serious trouble. I'm assuming, I haven't spoken to him. And of course this is this. But I think that he missed, and Hikaru also thought that he missed, a really cool defensive idea, which is sacrificing the rook, and now a really fun move, knight b8. Going back with the knight to its home square, hitting the bishop, and a discovered attack on the knight, and now you're just doing well, and you're going to win back the material. Instead, David Anton went for the tactical solution, and Hikaru, rather than taking the rook, just takes back, pressures this, rook is coming. The queenside pawns here are absolutely dead in the water, and that's exactly what happens. Then David Anton sacrifices a knight, thinking he's going to win it back, but what happens is Hikaru finds a really nice tactical resource here. He plays knight takes f7. And this cannot be taken because you take the queen, and if you take my queen, I take the rook, and I keep your queen hanging and the rook hanging, so we get an endgame that looks like this, where white has 2 rooks and a knight. For a queen, that's better because 5 plus 5 plus 3 is 13, and a queen is 9. 13 is more than 9. All right, have a good night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the recap. Bishop takes c2, take, and Hikaru just worked on converting this, brought the knight back, and a few moves later, on move 32, David Anton resigned because he's just getting ladder mated. And Hikaru, very convincing win. After this was in clear first place ahead of everybody else. Very close race up top, but David Anton needed a win or a draw to get back into it. This was basically him on the verge of elimination. Another very important first round matchup was between Anish Giri and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, because both these guys were about half a point away from qualification. First, we get a Sicilian defense and knight c6, and you'll say, well, why is this so important, Levy? Why are you being so dramatic? Stop being dramatic. Maxime does not play knight c6. Maxime is a Najdorf player. Anish did recently publish a repertoire on the Najdorf, but Anish goes for MVL goes for what's called a classical Sicilian, and then they get a position in the Sozin. Look, the last time I tried to pronounce this word, you guys destroyed me in the comments with how I pronounced Scheveningen. I'm sorry. Please spell it out for me. I should have done my research before we started this video. I don't know how to say that word, all right? I'm really sorry. Anyway, he played a Scheveningen, bishop e3, and queenside castle, and the game becomes... First of all, MVL blundered on move 10 and was completely lost. In this move order, if Giri had played knight f5, g6, bishop g5, he's just winning. So knight f5 is apparently just a really good move in this move order, but he played knight back to b3. And we got what we got. This is the game that very much resembles the game between Giri and Aronian, if you remember from my other recap video. Opposite side castling, right? Sicilian defense, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have one guy go that way, one guy go that way. Let's fight. And that's exactly what the players did. MVL starts attacking on that side. Giri breaking through over there. Hunts brings out the king here to f7. Knight f3. But MVL, to his credit, was defending extremely well. And in this position, the players had to swap off in a really funny way. MVL sacrifices his rook, but the structure here is so damaged, and e4 is about to fall, that Giri sacrifices back, and gets this position, this endgame is ever so slightly better for Anish because these pawns are just blocking in the bishop, and he's got a lot of light squared holes. This knight can operate on light and dark, whereas the enemy bishop dominates the dark squares, but can't fight on the light squares. And you'll watch as the game progresses how Anish pokes and prods. Look at this, c5, nice idea. If pawn takes c5, the knight plants itself on c4. That's called a positional pawn sacrifice. Don't we all wish we could be better at those? But we get queen c5, and Anish just kept poking him on the light squares, not trading the queen, all the way until MVL got over-aggressive here with his king, let in the enemy queen, lost the pawn, and Anish Giri says, chef's kiss, queen d5 check. Simplifies it into a winning rook knight and versus rook and bishop endgame because of his material advantage, gets a second pawn, and I have to push my pawns, and then look at this. Sacrifices the knight. He loses the knight, but because he has 3 passed pawns, he can bring his king, and king b6, and MVL resigns. And this is why, after this video, you should watch the king and pawn endgame video that I have, because you have to understand why this is winning, is you use this pawn as a decoy. Yes, the king can hunt it down, but you are never stopping me from going here. King b3, king e6, king a3. I'm going to take this, move my king, and I'm going to promote. Anish Giri, a huge win versus a fellow contender for the final qualification spot here in the first round, defeats Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And the other decisive first round game, this one doesn't have such a big implication on the overall standings, but listen, you got the bar brawlers. I mean, these two, some of the most creative wizards, not just of Russian chess, of chess period, and they did not disappoint. A King's Indian defense. This is my favorite line in the King's Indian, the 2 bishops. Bishop e2, bishop e3. In many lines, white does some crazy stuff with these pawns and doesn't develop the knight. And Dubov plays a very provocative variation. He jumps his knight all the way around the board. I mean, look at I don't know what Dubov was trying to do here. We need like a Dubov on a horse meme. And then e6, and he sacrifices material here. Watch. He gives away his knight on h6, and now, oh, this is a beautiful move by Nepo, f5. Understanding that if the bishop takes, you can sack this pawn and just castle long, and even though material is equal, knight for 3 pawns, material is equal, position is not. White is almost winning here, because the presence of the black pawns are not felt. In fact, it is white who feels the presence of the knight much more so than the 3 pawns. It's a situation where 3 does not equal 3, all right? We have a lot of different life lessons. Before 13 was more than 9, now 3 is not equal to 3. So in the game, Dubov was fighting back. Nepo castles his king into completely wide open territory just because he understands that there's nothing. Now here, Dubov sacrifices a full rook. He is just a full rook down, and now Nepo has to deal with these bishops. So what does Nepo do a few moves later? Nepo gets the pieces traded. First, we get a little bit more tension building, but watch, f6, the first key move. Now, if queen takes f6, we don't actually go for h7 and king f8. That looks really nice. No. We simplify. We're up material. Just simplify. You don't need to checkmate the other person. Make it easy for yourself. Simplification wins a pawn. Pieces get traded. Rook f1, although, of course, you can also take this bishop. But this and it's mate. Actually, Daniil Dubov blunders a checkmate. Doesn't matter where he moves. Rook f8 is just checkmate in one move. Fantastic game from Nepo defeating Daniil. Daniil, in the summer, lost 2 games in the final 2 rounds of one of these things and got eliminated from the final 8. So we were really monitoring whether or not that would happen. Now we move to the only decisive game. That's a spoiler, but the only decisive game of the second round of the day, which is round 10 overall. We finally get the marquee matchup. Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura. We were expecting a very quick draw, but, you know, Magnus was seen eating on stream, getting some more energy, food and water, you know, cyborg nuts and bolts or whatever he eats. And this one was a main, kind of a Rio, the Rio variation, the Rio, whatever it's called, but like a mainline Berlin without the queen trade. Now, we just thought, okay, I mean, they're going to trade their pieces. But here's the thing, when you play against Magnus Carlsen, you look at the slightest of things, Magnus Carlsen doubles his own pawns and makes this little thorny little thing here, which allows him to bring his king forward. And then Magnus Carlsen starts doing some stuff on the other side. Doesn't trade the rook, starts pushing on the other side of the board. Look at that, advancing, blops his knight into c5. As I told to Anna Rudolph, when we were doing the broadcast together, I said, if you play a blitz game on chess.com and someone does this to their structure, you go, stupid guy, doubling their g-pawns, what are they doing? What is all this? This pawn, what is that? I'm just gonna go here. When you play Magnus Carlsen, it's like, oh my god, what is he doing? Why did he double his g-pawns? Why is he pushing his a-pawn all the way up the board? Oh my god, what does he want? Leave me alone. It's very different when you play Magnus, but Hikaru defended this very well. First of all, he made this trade. Then he played a really nice pawn break, f5. Take, to try to trade off and get his bishop into the game and his knight into the game. Played h5, very nice move as well. Going against g4, knight d3, bishop back to c8. Magnus Carlsen rotates the knight over, so does Hikaru. Magnus pushes, Hikaru pushes. Now we get knight back, rook c7, everything is protected. Hikaru plays h4. The knight and the pawn both clamp down on the g3 square. Bishop d3, now we have g5. This is not a fork, because the bishop just takes, that's nothing. So knight comes back, and this knight comes back. Now these pawns have been barricaded, they've been blockaded, they can't really make any forward progress. Knight c3, now it's time for Hikaru to start bringing his king. Magnus here transforms this endgame because this is a very powerful knight. He trades the knights and has a passed pawn. He's also going to try to fight against these pawns in the future and get a passed pawn on that side of the board. Hikaru plays b5 looking to solve his problems, and now these pawns get traded. Potential weakness on a7. Rook b1, bishop c4. Hikaru allows the rook in, but he trades it for the d6 pawn. Says, you could have that pawn, let me get the d6 pawn. And here, he had to make a really big decision of where to move with his bishop. To trade the bishop so that this pawn can't just go. He played bishop d5 and he lost. He lost the game. After rook d7, pinning the bishop to the rook, you can give a check, but the king just walks up and ends up attacking the rook, so that's nothing. You can't move the bishop, and if you do something like check here, I just trade and I promote. You just cannot stop me from making the queen. What Hikaru had missed during the game was that after king e6 defending everything, rook d8 maintains this pin. And if you push and I push and you push, I don't push, I take. Why? Take, a7, c2, and I queen with check. That's it. That's what he missed. He missed this with several minutes on the clock. I mean, maybe about a minute, maybe 2 minutes on the clock. Just a slip in the calculation, a blunder. Magnus Carlsen finds it immediately because he's Magnus Carlsen. And Magnus Carlsen wins the game against Hikaru, and with this win, takes first place. So now Magnus Carlsen is half a point ahead of Hikaru with 6 points. It's amazing. Magnus Carlsen, like, a day ago, people were like, he's washed up, what's wrong with Magnus? Now he's back in clear first. I mean, the man, you know how good you are when every time you have a not great result, someone thinks you're ready to retire, someone thinks you're out of your, you're out of your prime. So, we now move to the final round. Now, going into the final round, a few things were at play. Dubov and Grishuk, both guys we're going to keep an eye on this round, could have potentially been booted, depending on how they did. Giri was playing against Hikaru, which we will look at as well, but first we're going to look at this game. If MVL beats Grishuk, he will make it into the qualification stage for the next round. What will happen? Let's see if he can do it. First things first. Now, of course, we get an anti-Sicilian, because nobody wants to challenge him in a Sicilian. Then we get Grishuk playing e5. And the reason you play like this against the guy who has to beat you, because he's a point behind you, is because, like, what is Black going to do here? I mean, look at how much nagging pressure Black is under. And MVL felt it. I mean, he had to trade the queen. He developed. But look at this. I mean, who wants to deal with these two bishops staring down this side of the board? And not to mention the 3 pawns here and the 2 pawns on this side. It's a queenside majority. It's a nightmare in all endgames. So then, knight to h5, bishop e3, bishop b5, bishop b6, knight f6, and knight d7. And in this position, Alexander Grishuk had a win. He had a win. Actually, a move later, he had a win. He could have played an idea g4. So first he played rook d1, bringing his rook to attack the knight. We got rook to e8. And in this position, if he had played the move pawn to g4, trying to remove the defender of the knight, bishop to e6, he could have just taken. If bishop takes, you have rook takes, and if bishop here, you take this rook, this bishop. If take, then here, you are left with 2 bishops versus a rook, which is very good. And if bishop takes bishop, you just take on e7. You're a pawn up. You will probably win this game because I don't know how MVL is going to guard all his pawns. But Grishuk didn't do that. Grishuk played bishop e4, trying to be very solid, sucking the life out of his opponent. Now MVL here begins fighting back. He says, all right, man, you missed your chance. Should have beat me when you should have killed me when you had the opportunity. Now I'm going to play knight d5. I'm going to sack my b7 pawn. I'm going to damage your structure. And here we go. What are you going to do about this pawn? And mate. Now, it's also important to note that at this point, Grishuk, MVL first, has 11 minutes. Still, Grishuk has 1 minute on the clock. And what ends up happening is MVL wins the a-pawn. Now, this endgame is drawable. It's drawable. Whether or not it can be drawn is a different story. So rook a7 doesn't allow the pawn to push without the rook kind of moving. And actually, it could have very well come down to the move h4. You do have to play h4, but MVL just pushed this pawn. Just push this pawn. And the thing for Grishuk is he cannot just go and win this pawn, because what will happen is Black will do exactly what he does in this game. He'll put the rook on a1, pawn on a2, and if you ever move the king out this way, I will check you and promote. If I just move my rook, you take my pawn. So what happens in this game is MVL begins crawling his king. He begins crawling his king forward, all while monitoring the movement of this rook. He then trades the pawns, now creating a 2-on-1 to get an outside pass pawn. He ends up doing this to force the king either forward or backward, pushes the pawn. Now the king has to hide, because there is no move that's going to be a check. But now the king starts coming, and Grishuk has to maintain the vision of this pawn. So rook a8, king e5, king d4, king d3, king e4, king f3, rook b2, king g2, and that's it. Rook c2, rook f1. And if you take on a2, rook f2, of course, trading, you lose both pawns, you lose. If you bring your king, your rook over here, this is also losing for white, because your king needs to be in front of my pawn. You cannot be defending from the back. Listen, that is not going to work here. Here from the back just does not work, and you will just make a queen. But in the game, Grishuk even mouse-slipped, and MVL made a queen, and the game was over. So, tough game for Grishuk. Crazy game for Grishuk. To lose like this in the last round, now MVL, by winning, qualifies because he has a better tiebreak score than Alexander Grishuk. So Grishuk's out. We say goodbye to Grishuk. We say goodbye to Anton Giharo. And we also have to say goodbye to Bentala Harikrishna, who tried his hardest, but was winless throughout this event. I believe that he had 10 draws and 1 loss, so he ended up with 5 points. Now, we also had the game between Anish Giri and Hikaru Nakamura, and Anish Giri has to at least draw this game, which the memes write themselves, but a win would also get him a spot. And he begins with a Sicilian, goes for e6, and Hikaru chooses not to engage in an open Sicilian, plays the move g3. And the position gets a very close nature. It shows you can play the King's Indian attack even versus the Sicilian defense, or the French, e4, e6, or the French. All right, now we get b5. So what Black wants here is a5, a4, b4, c4, bc, take, you know, all that. Hikaru puts a snap into that and just says a4, let me poke some holes here. b4, c4 to lock the structure, and now Hikaru gets what's called an initiative. Every move that he makes for the next like 5-6 moves is putting pressure on Anish. The knight goes back, the knight comes forward, pressuring c5. Bishop to b7, bishop to e3, attacking this pawn. Knight to a6, pawn to d4, breaking things in the center, looking to open up this bishop. Very similar to the Catalan bishop that he had in the first round. cd4, knight d4, queen c8, and now Hikaru plays queen e2, a solid improving move, monitoring the movement of this knight because it's very challenging. This rook is coming to the party. Giri swaps off a few pieces and plays rook d8, and here Hikaru sets a trap. He plays queen f3. That queen used to guard this pawn, well, if you play rook c1 and this pawn just starts moving because it's a pass pawn, it's going to be bad news. So Anish says, you know, he says a prayer, and he takes the pawn on c4. Queen is forced to retreat, and now he trades. It's amazing that despite losing a pawn, you can trade, but now, watch, rook c6, ouch. Knight goes back to b8, rook c8 check. Rook goes back to d8, don't trade, maintain the tension, defend your own rook. This knight is going to have difficulty moving if you make the trade. If you don't make the trade, I can move my knight and everything is protected. However, rook a8, I got reinforcements, I'm coming in. Rook d8, I'm going to take the pawn on a7. Now I'm creating an outside pass pawn. The same outside pass pawn that made Magnus Carlsen defeat Hikaru. We got bishop to f6, we got a5. Let's trade. Knight e5, a6, sacrificing the knight. Rook takes, rook a8, bam, a7. Same motif as last game that we saw in the Grishuk game. If this rook can defend the pawn from the back, this is a win for black. But you can't. And if you play knight c6 trying to win the pawn, or rook d7, I sacrifice the rook with check and I queen. And now, very instructive moment as well. If the b pawns are traded, both sides removed, this is probably a draw. Why? Queen versus rook, knight, and pawn. That's 9-9. That's the same. And even though it comes in different forms, because all the pawns are on the same side of the board, black is going to get something called a fortress, where you just board up everything is protected. But Hikaru finds a way to continue to poke holes and make it impossible for Anish to protect his b-pawn. Then he wins the b-pawn, infiltrates again with the queen, forces the king to come out a little bit, pushes his pawns here just to, again, you know, make sure nothing can move, trades one pawn. But really, it starts right here. What is Hikaru's biggest asset? And by the way, that's not a free rook. That's where you yell, oh no, my rook, and Eric Rosen twitches somewhere because of knight f4. That's not a free rook. But that pawn's going. You can even sacrifice a pawn with check because you're just going to push. You're just going to push. You're also not going to push here and get mated. It's never too late to get mated, right? Come on, we've all been there. And now the king hides. The queen goes back to e4. Rook b5, b7. Protected. Knight back to d8. Here Anish could have played f6, for example. But it's still losing. And the game ends on knight d8 in a very funny final move. Hikaru promotes to a rook. He promotes to a rook because if you take it, I have a fork. Anish Giri resigns the game after the promotion and is eliminated from the Airthings Masters. Sucks. Big fan of Anish. I want to see him in the quarterfinals. But he's eliminated at the hands of Hikaru, who ends the day with 3 decisive results. Yesterday, he got a lot of criticism for his quick draws, particularly against Wesley. People were creating some hilarious theories that he and Wesley agreed to a draw because they're both Americans and they have some sort of, I don't know. People, I mean, it's the same as like, you know, the Magnus should retire. He's washed up. Yeah, okay, good luck with that. In the final round, Magnus and Nepo drew very quickly, by the way. There was a couple of other final round games that were decisive. The one between Levon Aragnan and David Anton was decisive as well, but it doesn't really have a huge effect on the standings because David was eliminated. We will very, very quickly go through it. It was a Rossalimo. It ended up being a more close Sicilian where David Anton played d5. The players traded pieces, and a3 trying to expand on the queen side. I mean, it's a more or less peaceful game, but Levon had a really nice position. And then he went for this idea where he sacrifices the piece to win it back, but blunders this gorgeous move, bishop a4. So first of all, you cannot take because your rook is hanging, and if you take, and then take, rook d1 is mate. So that's mate. Don't hang mate. And now David snuck his bishop in. So David, despite having a bad tournament, finds a way to win, not a pawn right now, but he's going to end up winning a pawn with all this activity, and pressuring an f5. So rather than now winning a pawn, he gets a position where he's just got very nice control of the position, and Levon's bishop is out on b6. So Levon could have sacrificed the pawn. Instead, he chooses to go this route, where his bishop is just kind of stuck over there in captivity. And now, watch, as David Anton just plays a brilliant game. Levon sacrifices a pawn for activity, but loses control of the f-file, tries to bring his bishop back into the game, but now g3, and now rook is coming to f2, beautiful game. Now, because rook comes up to cover f2, you get rook to f1, utilizing the changing of positioning. The rook sneaks in and just starts beating everybody up. And now you just have a pass pawn. And David Anton glides through Levon Aronian. Absolutely glides through him in the opposite colored bishop endgame, rendering him completely defenseless, simplifying, winning all of his pawns, and the bishop on c4 defends the promotion square and defends the e2 pawn. You trade, and that's it. You bring the king, and you just start pushing. It made it look effortless. made it look effortless. It's a shame that he played such a brilliant game in the final round because he beats Levon, but Levon still qualifies. But he, you know, and David Anton is still eliminated, but it just goes to show you that, you know, he was invited for a reason, and he can fight at this level. And the final game of the final round is the game between Wesley So and Daniil Dubov. Of course, this will bring excitement. I actually expected Wesley So to play some crazy stuff, very solid stuff, but they went into, this is like, don't exactly know which variation of the Ruy Lopez this is, but with b5, c5, I believe it's like Arkhangelsk, but then it was a4, and c3, and okay, I think the most exciting moments happen here, when Wesley plays g takes f3. This is okay, very, very non-standard stuff, and he's just trying to keep his center defended. Wesley says, let me get this pawn, let me hang on to it. Knight h5, and this is where you go call an ambulance, but not for me. King h1. Yes, my king is open, but actually, I'm going to get a rook on the g-file, and what do you have on the g-file? Nothing. Oh, you want to bring your queen? Okay, well, here's my bishop to defend the center. Oh, you want to trade the center and attack my rook? So? Oh, so what? You're going to win my knight and bishop a4. And? Okay, you take my pawn? Okay, I take here. Bishop b6. Position is balanced, actually. Material is totally equal. But Wesley plays rook g4. And, he's going to play f4 now. And, he's going to play rook a4 to trade this. And then he's going to centralize his bishop, and feels like this position for Daniil, you know, is like this. Please don't hurt me. And, Wesley's coming to hurt you. f5. Sacrificing a pawn, but opening up the line of the bishop to hit the queen. Yes, you have a check, but if you check me, I just bring my rook back and then I mate you. Okay, so don't get mated. So instead of that, we get f6. But now, using the concept of danger levels, he doesn't get his bishop out of the way, he attacks the queen instead. Queen g7. Ouch. That is a beautiful move. You cannot take because of this, and if you take with this, Wesley So finds a beautiful... This is not what happened in the game, but the point is, you play queen a8, and there is nothing Dubov can do to defend the rook! Because the bishop is protecting the king from coming closer, and if he takes its mate... Ouch! Ouch! Rook e8! Beautiful move! Bishop goes back to a7, queen d7! Oh my goodness! The point is that if you take the queen, I have rook f8 and rook g8 mate, or I have bishop f6 and rook f8. Ouch! Ouch, ouch, whew, everything's hot, the stove is hot, h6, and now the final finishing touch, queen c8, the immortal bishop on g5, attacked by all du trois, cannot be touched. Rook e8, queen e8, king h7, and just to rub it in his face even more, bishop takes f6. Can't touch me. Da-na-na-na. I don't want to get copyright struck. Please don't copyright strike me, YouTube. What an exciting final round game. Wesley So, beautiful win. I mean, the man is capable of playing such brilliant chess. They just don't want to do it all the time because sometimes it's better to be more practical. But my friends, that is the final game of the preliminary round. And these are our brackets. We will begin tomorrow's playoffs with Magnus Carlsen versus Daniil Dubov, his team member. Jan Nepomniachtchi versus Timur Rajabov, Wesley So versus Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, and Hikaru Nakamura versus Levon Ranyan. It's a shame we had to say goodbye to 4 grandmasters today, but there's going to be one of these tournaments every single month, and it's been a pleasure making these for you. Let me know who your favorites are to advance into the semifinals, and I will see you in the next recap video.